right. I guess that's my cue is to start speaking, eh? So we have more people coming and joining. We just had an all hands, so some people are struggling or whatever. So, but hi, my name is Jessica. I am the engineering manager for the team that will be doing the community call today. It's quite a massive team at this point, so we do quite a lot of things, mostly within the backend realm. So we have engineers working on everything from the API, abstracting things with the schema, all sorts of things, all the way over to release engineering to, yeah, we tried to narrow it down a little bit because and removed plugins because I think they just had a community call over the summer. Yeah, that's just a little bit about what we're doing. And that's a little introduction from me. I'm not sure if anybody else was wanting to introduce themselves or to start talking about some of the things that we've been working on. Also, I'm going to go and pick a name at random.
So just curious, what in general, what kind of stuff are you working on in general? Backend stuff, of course, but what does backend mean in the Grafana sense?
These are very hard questions, Marcus. You didn't prepare me.
Oh no, maybe some of your teammates can help you.
I could give a very simple top level answer to that. So I'm Malcolm. So I joined Jessica's team in August, although I've been with the company for a number of years. So, what I think the way to see it is that for a long time, the role of the back end is sort of to serve the front end. So it's almost playing somewhat second fiddle. Whatever the front end needs, we'll do it. What that ends up with is something that's powerful, but not necessarily as well organized as it could be. So what we're looking at is actually, I guess you could sort of say, if we were to build this, how would we architect it? What's the right way for this to be? How do we want it to have in terms of the objects that it manages? Obviously, it's the thing. Grafana gives you this wonderful user interface that allows you to edit things. But they need to be persisted, and it's the backend's job to persist them. So how do they get persisted in the most efficient way? How do we provide APIs to access and manipulate those objects? How do we validate that the objects that are being persisted are in fact correct according to what the definitions and so on? So that's really a lot of what we're. That's a really big picture view.
So what is the team working on right now? I imagine that there's tons of feature requests and tons of stuff that we want to be doing. Is there anything that you're excited about right now? What is what are you working on right now, and what is kind of in the near-term roadmap?
So I could start with just say, so I've just joined. We just formed a release engineering team. We're simply looking at, any of our developers, any people working on Grafana spend time waiting for builds to happen. When we release Grafana, we spend time going through the steps to make the release. So we're going to be looking at those two. We are already looking at those two things and looking for ways we can make developers' lives easier so that they can spend more time adding cool features to Grafana and less time waiting for builds. So that's one thing. Yeah, the other thing is sort of I think there's lots of things we could say, but there's also looking at in terms of adding schema to Grafana so that the objects that we store can be validated and we can know what their correct form is. And I suspect Sam might feel like saying something more about that.
Yeah, we've been I apologize for my voice. I am sick. My whole house is sick. We have been working on schematization of Grafana for months now, and we've developed our own schema system for it, and made considerable progress. It's a complex topic because Grafana dashboards are complex objects that are constituted by a lot of plugins, which means you can't just write a single schema. You have to have a composite schema in order to be able to actually adequately cover them. So there's been a lot of pieces happening kind of in the background. Certainly we talked about at GrafanaCon in June. What we're aiming for with 8.3, there's a roadmap issue out there. I can provide a link if need be. There's a roadmap that describes what we're aiming for in 8.3, which is essentially sort of more documentation and more clearer public-facing communication, as well as progress in a number of areas. I feel like it's out of scope to go too much into the details of what those areas are, but essentially where the project is at is we have functioning schema. They're sloppy in a number of ways. They're not where we want them to eventually be, but the foundations of the system are in place. So like an adventurous third-party user could start actually doing things with our, could realistically start doing things with our schema come 8.3. And there will be at least sort of some guarantees in place, but we're looking more at Grafana 9 for sort of really hitting the schema goals, like getting to the point where, I mean, we'll really know that we've arrived when the front end app is no longer responsible for like taking a Grafana dashboard and translating it into like what a newer Grafana version expects, when that's actually functionality that's totally encompassed in our schema system and you can do without having a Grafana instance running anywhere. It just like does it because we've taken all the migration logic and encapsulated into this schema system. So like those really firm, clear guarantees are not going to be around until 9. But the basics of the system and folks who are adventurous and already doing things like, using Grafana will probably be able to start using pieces of the new system around 8.3. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to be, have clear sort of points for receiving feedback and doing back and forth communication around what people's needs are with it.
So you've just answered the stupid person's question I was going to ask. Why should I care? So you're saying people who are using things like Grafana might see benefit, but does that really justify all the effort? What's the point?
What's the point of the schematization in general?
Yeah.
I mean, there are. What is the point of schematization? We want to make a strong foundation to build on, right? Like at the end of the day, anyone who has worked with any one of the Grafana libraries or one of the like the third-party libraries, even the ones that we support for generating dashboards from code, working with Grafana from code, knows that it is a process that mostly works. Asterisk, asterisk, fuzz, fuzz, all over the place. And we would like to not be in that world. We would like to build reliable tools. We think that Grafana is a very important part of any cloud native ecosystem and most sort of observability ecosystems going forward. But we fall down when it comes to being able to really hook in to the GitOps as code type workflows that are essential to doing, modern software development. So the schematization work, we think, will not just provide a good foundation, but provide a foundation that is of such quality it has not been seen before, dare I say. We, like I said, we have created a new schema system. It's written in Q, and we have a bunch of things spinning here because we think there's a lot more that we could do with as code, but you need to be more rigorous and clear about how schema get defined for it to work well. So we're doing the legwork.
So it sounds like you're doing this to provide like a stronger assertions about dashboards in general. Like, would you like, is it, you know, like a typed language, for example, rather than say something like Python, where you can get really anything. And this is being able to make assertions. And once we were able to do that, like, what is something that, for example, you'd be excited to see the community doing with this, rather than, you know, I understand that, you know, with dashboards as code, being able to, you know, do GitOps, but are there any like tools and you know, things that you think that might come out of this that is not necessarily just purely Grafana centric, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, already there are. Like I gave the schema framework that we created for this is called Schemata. I literally just made a repository for it like 2 hours ago. It's been inside of Grafana, but it's going to be its own public project. Hopefully that will gain wider adoption. To be clear, it's a shell repository because I haven't put the files in it yet because I needed to, basically I opened it because right now there's also a Q town hall happening and I needed to put up like a roadmap alignment thing with them. But there's that. We also have the poly package project out there, which is supposed to be a successor to Mixins. A way of packaging together your observability resources that is much more tight and convenient and clear than exists today. And crucially, one that, you know, we hope to be able to actually drive from the UI instead of having a lot of awkward, like, export this from Grafana and then write it back to disk and then like have a pull request around it. One of the things that we get with this queue-based system is, since we can actually like validate the correctness of the stuff that's on disk instead of just, you know, run on Hopium like we do with JSON it, we're able to make much more reliable automated systems out of it at sort of every stage. A thing that I think will be able to start, we can't even really see today, but will come into view as this stuff comes into place, is being able to do things like expressing organizational policy over the way that, you know, sets of dashboards and then eventually other objects, you know, Poly will roll in Prometheus alerts and rules. So like expressing policy over the way that like properties that dashboards are supposed to have. Relatively banal things like coloration, although those still matter, but also doing things like linting over your queries and making sure that certain properties are present, and ensuring uniformity over the way that like certain dashboards are supposed to look, so that, you know, your entire organization knows that like this dashboard looks the way that it's, or this is a certain class of dashboard. It's like an SLO dashboard or something, and this is the way that they're supposed to be laid out. You can express that as a policy. These are the kinds of things that become possible when we have effectively a typed language for talking about what dashboards are, and it's not really feasible today. And to be clear, part of the reason that this takes a while and that this is difficult is that the only way to really make this work is if the system that we use to schematize Grafana, these objects, is the same one that the Grafana front end uses. It is about joining the ends. Like, you can't have a secondary system over here that's sort of trying to hope and reverse engineer the way the dashboards work and actually have a reliable system. There has to be one canonical statement of what the form of a persistent dashboard is supposed to look like in order to have both all of our supporting systems, policy expressions, our GitOps stuff, like all fold together nicely, and have it all cooperate nicely with the Grafana front end where all this stuff actually, you know, does things. So, yeah. I can put the as code roadmap in the messages here. There.
So to answer the question of what can the community do, as more and more of this gets into place, as these abstractions get into place, you can, as it were, we can start to move up the abstraction tree. We can make more substantial things with less effort. And what would be great is to see more and more people using these tools to when I write a piece of software, I publish a zip file that contains the binary of that software. What if I published a package that says this is how you observe this software, and that happens, and as a standard piece of the more and more of that those are made, the better.
Yeah, that right there is basically the goal of poly packages that Malcolm just described, is the idea that when you ship software, you should ship the tools to observe it along with. And if you start with that as an assertion about the way that the world should be, and you work backwards to like, what are the necessary conditions in order to make that a reasonable ask for people who are actually writing software and not like observagineers to do that. That's sort of how we've gotten back to this point. If I'm not somebody who, thinks about observability for my day job, I'm not going to be spending time fighting JSON it up and down to like force it into the right shape. I need a really reliable underlying foundation that I'm expressing the dashboard objects, the alerts, the rules that I'm packaging them up into, that's validatable, that I can not think about because it's so reliable. We built automation on top of it. That's like the world that we're going towards. And that all seems totally prerequisite to being able to make participation in the collective effort of trying to observe your entire system. It's necessary, because we can't ask people to care about this stuff enough to. Yeah, go ahead, Malcolm.
So what you're saying is we're trying to build tools for full-time software developers and part-time who are also part-time observabilityologists.
Whichever creative word we come up for it. Yeah, pretty much. Like,
it's just like the next generation DevOps.
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, like, testing wasn't really a thing yet. And it really has become this standard part of the software developer's toolkit. You're not shipping serious software if you're not writing tests for it. And I think that it's feasible to get to a world where people have the same sort of organic expectations of doing observability work, but we have to have the tools in place to remove the friction so that they can spend their time thinking about the thing they're trying to observe and exactly what matters about it, and absolutely nothing else in between. Like, you've got your application, you got your observability bits, and you are not thinking about all the garbage steps in between that you have to do in order to like package up and distribute that to all the people that might be consuming it.
So I'm curious then, like, because we have the dashboards page on grafana.com, right, where you can you can go there, you can search for a Prometheus. I want to monitor Prometheus or itself, or I want to monitor something, and I just go there, I search for it, I find a really nice dashboard, and I install it, and it seems to work. So this sounds like it could be some improvements on this. How would that, would you, instead of dashboards, would you see like an app store for these observability packages instead of the dashboards that we have today?
I think it'd be amazing. Yes, and we've talked about things like that internally. I would say we don't even really need to limit it to observability per se, because there's lots of kinds of data that you can consume through Grafana, and there's no reason to say that such a data product needs to be just an observability product. But yes, like, I think that there's a totally foreseeable future. Data apps, yeah. There's a totally foreseeable future in which you ship up a package of different bits of configuration that are essentially, this is how you do a certain data task. And there's a bunch of things between here and there to be able to make that work well. But we're taking the long view on this one and saying that we think that it is fundamentally valuable to be able to do something like that. But to do it, we need those sufficiently reliable foundations that that you can publish something like this and know that it's published correctly. I would love to be able to click together the appropriate parts in the Grafana UI. Here's the dashboards, here's the alerts, here's the rules, here's the giant piles of other config that I can imagine being relevant. Bundle them together, and then given that you have equipped your Grafana instance with the appropriate credentials to talk to the Grafana marketplace, hit a button that publishes your the latest state of your package. And this is I don't know how feasible that is. I'm not like promising or putting a timeline on it or anything like that, but North Star wise, I think that is absolutely the right goal to be focused on. Realistically, there's little difference between doing that for like OSS publishing and there is for doing that for like publishing a data app inside your company that's going to be consumed in a similar kind of way. We're doing packaging again there at that point. And so you've got private repos and public repos, and we can run a public one and you can run a private one internally at your company.
But just to play slight devil's advocate, Marcus is already saying that we have a place where you can go download dashboards. Isn't that enough? What are we? What more than that do we?
No, they're not. I mean, dashboards are I'd say this, right? Like, can you tell me what the criteria are that establish a dashboard as, well, I won't even say ideal. I'll just say good. Do you know what makes a good dashboard? Can you write those criteria down in a list? Like, what's sufficient to establish it as good? How often have you opened up a dashboard and been unable to tell because you are unfamiliar with the data that's coming in, whether this is a good dashboard, not a good dashboard, a broken dashboard, not a broken dashboard, a partially broken dashboard? Like, how much can you actually tell about these things when all that you get is the sort of most distilled form of here's the data flowing through? There are, I think, a lot of constituent parts that go into making a data app comprehensible by someone who didn't make it and they're like immediate team members. So if we want to really do this well, then part of it is we need supplementary pieces in order to actually make like what you're consuming understandable. Another part of it is indeed dashboards are not sufficient for doing all of the things. Like you also need to, in the observability case, do things like rules and alerts. Yeah. There are some best practices, but what I was saying was criteria, like that are, good, bad. The standard that we have sort of settled on is not obviously wrong.
Yeah, I think, when talking about criteria, I mean, I'm personally very excited about what kind of criteria that will evolve once we make this available. Can we provide like good color schemes that are accessible, that are use these color schemes to create a great dashboard, make sure that you're consistent throughout your whole Grafana installation. No matter if you have 500 dashboards in it, you're using colors, you're using graphs and everything in a consistent way. I think that's personally what I'm super excited about, just that consistency and letting good practices evolve and be codified. I think is personally something that I'm very excited to see what the community might come up with. So what else is cooking? except GitOps and schemas. Malcolm, you mentioned a new release engineering team. Is there anything else you can share with the audience?
So I think I could give a brief follow-up on the schematization and code generation that can drive from there. So by the way, I'm Serge. I'm part of the backend team and primarily focused on the API part of it. And when we speak about API, the first reaction of the users is, don't you dare to change it, don't you dare to touch it, because my Proxy bash scripts depend on it and you'd rather not break it. The answer is we're not going to, and we are primarily focusing on the refactorings, on the large refactorings that are going around the API part of the Grafana backend. And again, why to do the refactoring if everything has been working for years? The short answer is to boost the reliability of the Grafana backend, to remove all the dark magic that has been there for some years, to boost the performance. So we are trying to optimize your cloud bills, and yeah, to leverage everything that schematization, code generation, static code analysis, linting would give us. So speaking of the refactorings, the biggest things that are ongoing now around the API is the replacement of the web framework. As you may have known from the beginning, Grafana has been based on the Macaron framework, which is a really good solution if you want to kick off something quickly, if you want to bootstrap quickly, because it does not force you to think about the type safety or write lots of code. You can connect together the basic parts and it will do the rest. But as your code base grows, it becomes harder and harder to actually detect errors, find bugs, and it might cause even certain vulnerabilities related to that. So instead of using Macaron, which rather became an obstacle than a tool for us, we decided to go with a standard library and with whatever the Go stdlib offers us with NetHTTP. We do have custom middleware, we do have custom helpers, of course, but the foundation of the Grafana API is now the Go standard library and not a third-party framework. Additionally, we also want to move towards this standardization as much as possible. We are removing the remains of the custom testing framework and rely on the standard library testing. And standardization does not mean that we use Go standard library everywhere. We use the best practices everywhere. Specifically, if we talk about the instrumentation of the APIs that we have been using Logger, the third-party Logger, for a while, which again turned out to be a rather slowish, and it has been using Reflect and dynamic interfaces everywhere. We are switching that to GoKit Logger, which is proven to be quite fast according to our benchmarks and proven to be more type safe comparing to what we have now. And last but not least, we are switching our tracing tooling. We have been using Open Tracing before. We now use Open Telemetry, which is a more up-to-date API that is supposed to be the future replacement of the Open Tracing. So all these large refactories are ongoing right now. Please keep your eye on what's going on. And yeah, looking for the feedback on that.
So a lot of stuff happening on the backend side then. It sounds like there's a lot of improvements coming that aren't necessarily going to be maybe user-facing, but more, making it more sustainable and maintainable over time. So that's what I'm hearing.
Exactly. We aim for absolute backwards compatibility when it comes to the API, but we do want to be faster, safer, and more reliable.
And another way you could look at that is that what for the growth of the Grafana ecosystem, all the tools based on Grafana, plugins, and so on, they all want to be able to say, here's a new thing that I'm looking after. So let's make sure that the Grafana backend, not only is it stable, but it's as easy as possible to extend with plugins, with new API endpoints, with new object types, and so on. So really, our job is, I think, to serve in that regard to serve other Grafana developers so that they can be accelerated in their efforts as much as possible.
So I'm curious about, you mentioned open telemetry, right? How, what will the end user, how will the end user be able to utilize, the fact that, you have open telemetry throughout the Grafana code base? If I want to start using that for myself and just figure out how Grafana works, can I do that?
So if you want to monitor Grafana, if you have a Grafana instance running, you most likely collect logs from it, collect metrics from it, and probably collect traces from it to actually observe your Grafana instance. Currently, we do support only open tracing, and we, from my awareness, only support the Jaeger backend, which means if you are using some other tracing backend, so some other tracing tooling in your company, it may just not be compatible with how Grafana exposes its spans and its tracing information. OpenTelemetry is more advanced API that allows you to plug in the implementations differently. And that is how, for example, we can propagate spans and tracing information in two different formats. One is Jaeger compatible, which is kind of considered legacy these days. The other is W3C conformant way of sending spans as headers, and that probably will get adopted by more and more tools in the future. Similarly, you can plug in different tracing backends, and not just Jaeger, but other implementations of that. So basically, we are switching from the oldish tracing API that was fit to a certain tracing solution into something that is more flexible and more adopted.
So, hello everyone. So I see the agenda, and it doesn't include plugins, but I guess, Malcolm, you mentioned plugins a bit.
Now it does.
But yeah, I'm basically part of the Grafana backend platform team, but I've recently switched focus a bit towards plugins, and we sort of have a team focusing on the plugins platform of things. That is both backend and frontend. But I guess the main point of that is trying to improve the whole developer experience around plugins, like both from the developer's perspective, but also from the Grafana perspective. Like from the backend, providing everything that enables plugins to be used, sort of, in Grafana. Just to tell something about what we've been working on recently, I guess, is this plugin catalog, which allows you to browse the plugins that you have installed, but also browse plugins that you potentially could install, and also allow plugins to be installed through the Grafana UI rather than using the Grafana CLI, which has historically been the way you install plugins. So yeah, not sure if there's anything more to discuss around the catalog. Maybe just interesting to say that it's out there, and if you have any feedback on it, would appreciate to feed that back to us, either here or on GitHub or whatever, I guess.
So the plugin catalog, it's been available a few minor versions back, right? But it's been behind a feature flag. So yeah, now it's more available. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. That should be.
Is it even enabled by default?
Yeah, I think it is. So earlier it was like it wasn't embedded into Grafana core, but it was, yeah, it was a plugin, but now it is in core Grafana. But yeah, I shouldn't guarantee that it is enabled by default because I got uncertain now, but at least for me, locally, it is enabled. So
yeah, I believe it is on by default from the last version as well. Looks great.
Yeah, I guess I will forward that feedback to the front enders. I'm not responsible for how it looks.
So what are you responsible for then? I mean, more on the backend side. What's the tricky part of the plugin catalog from a backend perspective?
So the catalog is maybe not that tricky, but it's more the whole infrastructure of like providing support for backend plugins, as we call it. Like you can have like from the beginning, there was like panel plugins, data source plugins, and app plugins, but they were only client side. But with Grafana 7, we added official support for backend plugins. So that means that you could have like a data source client side that also has a backend part. So it's more like trying to figure out the whole infrastructure behind this, and sort of a bit related to what Sergey talked about earlier, like what we're trying to do with like the Grafana backend as a whole. Also trying to make like everything that powers plugins more powerful, and potentially allow it to extend it to potentially new interesting things that we can make pluggable.
Such as?
Yes, I guess one that has been discussed and potentially promised for quite some time is alert notifiers. That has been kind of a tricky thing historically. Like initially with the first Grafana alerting, when was that released? Grafana 4 point something, I think. Maybe Grafana 4. And we're quite open to accept like contributions of new notifiers. But I guess it came to a point where we sort of realized that we are not sure as maintainers that we can actually like take responsibility of all these notifiers. Like we don't know how to test them and like stuff like that. So at a point, it was sort of, we got very restrictive and started to talk about this would be a great thing to enable through plugins, so that anyone could like implement whatever notifier they wanted, in a sense. But yeah, I guess the discussion has been ongoing for years and we haven't really come there yet. And then I guess like new alerting happened with Grafana 8. So like currently we're in this world where we have like 2 alerting systems. Maybe right now it's not the right time to actually do that. But when we have like 1 alerting system, maybe that would be a good time. But with that, I would say like we have the webhook notifier, which is like very general, which allow anyone to basically implement their own webhook receiver, and with that they should be able to like implement their own notifier in a sense. Some other interesting aspects in regards to plugins that have come up is authentication, maybe like authentication providers. Like we have this generic OAuth solution, which is like we've tried throughout the years to keep it as lean as possible, but like the number of configuration parameters for it is just growing and growing, and that is sort of, yeah, it makes the life for us as maintainers hard to actually maintain all of that. So there is also where like a pluggable authentication provider could make sense for users that have special needs in regards to authentication, in a sense.
So basically, you know, what I'm hearing is that we're looking to create like a really stable backbone of the Grafana backend, and then splitting out a lot of functionality into separate modules that could potentially enable more plugin types in the future.
Yeah,
for example,
I hope
authentication. So, or things like, you know, the alert notifiers, would that be, you know, are we looking to add more plugin types, or do you think something like that would be like included in a backend plugin, say, or are we looking to expand the number of types of plugins, or do we think that it could be included in the existing types?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's, I think it's also part what we sort of need to wrap our head around moving forward. Like I told you about what we historically had in regards to plugin types, like panel, data source, and app. And then we sort of introduced the backend into the mix of this. But like every time, like even in our documentation, and when we try to explain it, it's like, it's a data source with a backend, but it's like since it's hard to actually explain what it is, and for like developers, what is it that you actually can implement? What are the possibilities? Like maybe how can we find a way to make it easier to reason about plugins in a sense, like both from the user perspective, but also from the developer perspective. And that is related, I would say, to this idea of plugin types. Because like right now, plugin types are basically client-side things, like panel, data source, app. But the backend, I mean, it could be seen as plugin type, but it isn't really right now.
Because you can create like panels with a backend as well, right? It's not just data sources.
It was, I mean, the idea was that you could. I'm not sure if you actually can right now.
Can't you, you know, wouldn't you be able to build a backend component and then like expose like HTTP, like a REST API that the panel could use as like a support if you want to offload things to the server, for example? Sure, I haven't actually tried it out, but
in theory, it should be possible. But I think at least earlier there was a limitation in Grafana itself, like because with Grafana 7, when we introduced support for backend plugins, the idea was to start with allowing this for data sources. So I'm not sure if we support panels, like a backend for panels, but it's
you can do it with an app plugin. That I'm sure about. Can add a backend to an app plugin. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, the basic idea from the beginning has been this discussion around like, what if you have some provider, let's say a cloud provider, let that be GCP or AWS or Azure. So they might have data sources, they might have notifiers, they may have like all these different kind of things. So like from the backend perspective, it could make sense to sort of bundle that into a backend. But then you would have like the client side panels, data sources, and like these kind of stuff to sort of connect them together, rather than like enforcing a certain backend to be connected directly to a data source or something like that. So I think that's the challenge I think we're currently facing, given that like plugin was introduced with Grafana version 3 or something.
Yeah.
And like we haven't really like expanded or rethinking what plugins actually means for like us as developers, plugin developers, users, and so on. So that's definitely an interesting topic that I hope we'll be able to provide better documentation and better guidance and features around moving forward.
Right, because I think back in 3.0, I think plugins were kind of introduced as a way to expand on, you could extend your own Grafana experience, and it wasn't so much made for, today we have like the plugin directory where you can get a hosted Grafana instance and you can start installing plugins from the community. And much like an app store and other platforms, and I don't think anyone at Grafana 3.0 could imagine that fully happening today. So I think just moving into that kind of perspective, and like you're saying, like rethinking what plugin means today.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, what are some potential other crazy ideas with plugins? Like, it's like interesting to think about like app plugins, for example, which there's probably a lot of room for improvement there. But like in general, it's interesting to think what if you would be able to store data using an app plugin, what kind of crazy plugins would you be able to build with that inside Grafana? Like,
right, because one of the current challenges I know is that if you want to build a panel plugin that authenticates to an API or something like that, you can't really, because there's no way to securely store credentials in a panel plugin, for example. But sometimes you just want to, you don't want a full-size data source, but you still want to make authenticated requests from a panel plugin. So I think there are some hybrids that could be interesting to explore, to be honest.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, since like given panel plugin is obviously client side, but we have this plugin Proxy, which that was the way to integrate with data sources and other systems, like I guess starting from Grafana 3 something, but then with Grafana version 4, when alerting came, there was a need for Grafana to actually like you had to have a backend for data source for Grafana to be able to use it in the alerting scenario. But given this plugin Proxy, it's still very useful today. Like you can build a client-side plugin that doesn't have a backend, but you can still use this plugin routes functionality, right? But it is a bit limited. You cannot do everything with that. So like if you find that what you want to do with it, you can't, you probably want to build a backend as well to sort of support your use case. But I think, or I'm not sure if you can define like routes for your panel plugin, and by that, like somehow make authenticated requests.
All right, to use a proxy as part of your panel plugin.
yeah, but as you say, you cannot really store configuration for a panel. So yeah, it's hard to make it like dynamically configured in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you would have to have a sort of a way of storing credentials that any panel could, I don't know, access somehow without necessarily.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But that is also like an interesting aspect. Like, yeah, as we said, you cannot configure anything with panel plugins today. With data source plugins, you create like instances and configure them. And with apps, you can enable one instance of an app per organization in Grafana. But what if you have like global configuration for plugins? Like for this certain data source, there's some common setting that I want to be the default, like as a starting point or something like that. So that could sort of be applied to panel plugins as well, perhaps, in a sense.
Right.
Not sure exactly what that would be, but let's take the Prometheus data source, for example. Like historically, it had some setting to say what HTTP method to use for connecting to Prometheus service. I think it was GET in the beginning because Prometheus didn't support POST at first, but then they added that. But GET was still the default because earlier versions of like people were probably still using older versions of Prometheus. But like as an example, maybe a global configuration could be just to switch the default to use POST, for example.
So like sort of like global configuration.
Yeah, then you wouldn't need to have to configure that in all of your data source instances, for example, stuff like that. But it's yeah, I'm just talking widely here. I'm not
not
sure if we're actually going to do that, but it's yeah, it's potentially related to allowing plugins to store custom information or data,
like a global key value store, basically. It's what you're saying.
Yeah, maybe.
Cool. I guess this is a shout out to or a question to the broader community. If this is something that you'd want to see, reach out to us or post in the forums or on GitHub and let us know that this is something that you'd be interested in using. And what's your use case? What would you like to be able to do, and so on. So we're very curious to hear more about how what kind of plugins that you would want to develop that you can't develop today. So please let us know. We're coming up on the hour here, so I would just like to thank everyone from the Grafana team that has joined and shared about what's happening in the backend squad, and all the community members that have dropped in during the call. And as usual, this will be available on YouTube in the next couple of days. So feel free to share it with your colleagues and friends, and I'll see you next month, which I believe will be the Cloud Data Sources team. So I'll see you then. Bye, everyone.